Hello once again, everyone. So, before we jump into the next really kind of round of fights from history, I wanted to take a little bit of time to go over dagger versus sword. And the reason I wanted to go over this is because it's going to frame a little bit of context that I won't cover in the next video, but I did kind of want to go over it since it's within the same family. That being asymmetrical weapons. Now, right now, my open classes are currently going over this topic, so this will also serve as a great general review for them as to the subject we've gone over. And joining me today is Jacob, otherwise known as Flounder, always happy to help me. So I'll go ahead and take the dagger. Thank you kindly. So, when it comes to dagger versus sword, we don't actually necessarily have a ton of sources. We do have a few, and today we're going to cover two of them in particular because I find it very interesting that these two, they're not quite a one-for-one, but they are very, very similar to each other despite being close to 100 years apart, at least in time of writing. Now, for this we're going to be covering Fiore de Liberi from the Art of Battle, and then, the Flower of Battle, and then we're going to be covering Paulus Hector Mair in his grand compendium of all sort of things. So, for starting off, we've got two different kinds of attacks that we have to deal with, that being thrust and cut. So for thrust, we're going to start off with the Italian style. Jig's going to take just posta longa / posta breve, and all he's looking to do with this thrust is just going to put it toward the middle of my chest with a passere forward. Go ahead. Boom. And that's what he's looking to get. That nice solid wedge in against my armor, possibly, or in against my body. That's going to get the job done. So that's what I'm dealing with first, and the way I'm going to protect myself is I'm going to go ahead and take dente d'Inchingaro, but now with the dagger. So to achieve this, my elbow tip and the tip of my dagger are presented forward. I've folded my body back. This not only allows me to have more force when I turn out of this, but it also protects a lot of the important parts of me. I've made myself a slightly narrower target, so he's probably going to go for around here or around here, which is a lot easier to defend than if I were standing broadly. I'm also going to go ahead and have my hand hovering here. Fiore himself shows his hand kind of on his hip. It's a good habit to have it just there or here. We can go ahead and have it here. So, the motion that I'm going to be doing as this thrust comes in is I'm going to push out with my dagger and end up kind of almost like I'm reaching for a gear shift is the way I like to think about it, just that kind of placement. I'm not looking to reach up at his thrust or anything along those lines. I'm just covering this opening by uncorking my body. Now, you can do this motion without moving, as we'll see later, but for now, Fiore recommends that you do a tornare, so a pass backwards as you do this. The reason I believe it is because with the thrust that Jacob is doing, he's really kind of diving in at me and covering a decent amount of ground. If I don't move, but he thrusts at me with that good, solid pass, I actually end up closer to him than I want to be. I want to try and maintain this sort of distance so that I can reach out. Whereas if I'm too close, now we start to have problems, and he's going to see my hand as a bigger threat and start counter-grappling. Versus from out here, he's still looking at sword and possibly even thinking about how he can get around me by the time I get that grip on. At least that is my theory. Not to mention, the tornare backwards does give you more time against him. So if he tries to pull away, you're still relatively safe to leave. If you go in and you miss, well, you die. So, here's the motion itself. So he's all centered up, I'm all centered up. He starts his thrust against me. I pass backwards as I open this up. Then I'm going to use the crescere of my left foot to seize hold of his hand. Now, I'm looking to get this nice and suppressed since it's already low. Get a good hold of it first so that he can't use his sword very well. And then I just plant that thrust wherever it is, either with a passere or what have you. So, we'll go ahead and show that from the other side. So, I'm down low, he goes for me, open it up, grab that arm, suppress that arm, then put the dagger where you will. Block, grab, stab. Now the reason that I'm putting so much emphasis on the order, and I'll talk about this again more later, I want to make sure I first lock out his sword, then I hold onto his right arm so that he can't execute any techniques, then I put my dagger where I will. If you try to rush the stab with your grab, if he chooses to counter wrestle or frankly just wiggle, you may not get the thrust where you need it to get. And this is especially true if you're ending up in armor, which, while neither source implies this, if you're in this situation, more than likely it's either self-defense, in which case you got to make that stab count, or it's on a battlefield situation, in which case you definitely have to make that stab count. But that's our first against the thrust. The second bit we'll show is against the cut. So for this, I'm going to once again assume the same position. Now, all Jacob is doing here is he's just passing forward with a passere, and executing a nice mean fendenti down onto my head. So go ahead. Boom. That's what I'm dealing with. That's what's going to hit me. Now, there's two interpretations here. I could either stifle his motion by doing an accrescere of my lead foot and catching him before his cut really begins, or I can also do an offline movement accrescere, which kind of drops me into this pocket of safety. We'll go over both to kind of show what it's going to be, but I'm going to lock my blade against my arm for this one, because I'm going to receive that blow on this shield that I will create. So first, they're just straight up against him, so I'm here, he starts his cut in to protect myself. Now, what I'm going to do is, rather than coming over from the side and pushing him down again, because his arms are already high, he has a very good chance of preventing me from doing that by just lifting his elbow or fighting me up here. He's got just as much grapple as I do. With the thrust, he was already low, so I didn't have to worry about that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to step out. I'm going to take my hand like this, and I'm going to grab hold of his elbow, and I'm going to push that up into his upper left opening, which turns him, at which point I can follow that through with the mother of all stabs. This is a very smooth motion, and it's also one that Fiore does quite a bit, both in armor and out of armor. This strike to the elbow can literally be that, a strike, as well as it has a good chance of turning him over, especially, again, if we're talking armor, I just put myself into his blind spot. I can take my sweet time putting that dagger where I want to. But here's that again. So he starts his cut, in, left hand up, turn, stab. Best he's going to get is maybe whipping a cut back at me as he turns around, but odds are I've still got that dagger in him before he did, and I can stay tight to him if I need be. Now that's one interpretation of it. The second interpretation of this would be I kind of drop into a hole, and the reason I'm going over this is because one plate where they show the catch shows him like this, the other plate shows him to the outside of his right foot. I also find that this works particularly well if I kind of drop into this pocket like I'm doing the colpi de volano. So, once again, if he's ready to execute his fendente, I'm in the same position, but this time, going through the cut slowly, I'm going to step into this area. I receive this blow like the image shows, so like this, but when you actually receive that force, I find it causes the arm to kind of shuck open, which is very good for me. All that force then gets turned, just like the colpi, and I have now a lot more pressure that I can exert. So I can step off of this, really get a ton of push when I put all that together. So, in my opinion, this is another great way to use this. Especially good if someone has already started executing the cut from further range, so you have to receive it, because I don't want to stay in place or in front of them at that point. So, here's that one more time. Let's actually switch sides to that one. I'll show that one more time, then we'll move on to the next part. So he starts his cut, boom, to receive it, up with that left hand, follow through. Nice and simple. Now, when it comes to counters, from the swordsman's perspective, at least with Fiore, we're going to see pretty simple. The first one is going to be this. So he's now indented in Shingao, he's ready to execute his cover. So as I pass forward, go and step a little bit forward. There we go. As I pass forward, he's going to tornare to cover. Boom. So go ahead and pass backward. Up. Yeah. He's new to this. And he goes to grab my arm and push it down. There it is. Now, what Fiore recommends we do is we take our left hand off and we're going to grab hold of his left elbow. The reason we're doing this is because I don't want to fight him at the body. If I go to fight him at the body, he's got the much better weapon for this. I want to fight him at sword range, so I need to get back there. So I'm going to take my left arm and grab hold of his elbow in full gear. This can be a little bit tricky, but out of gear, as they would have been, this isn't that hard. Grab hold of the cloth or whatever, and then torque it in front while ripping the sword clear. This turns him, or also just prevents him from being able to stab you. Fendenti to the back of his head, do as you know well. So, here's that again. So I'm here, I execute my thrust, he covers, grab, torque, do what you need to do. Now, if you're having trouble getting that turn because you're in more gear, you can also add a little bit of offline movement at the same time. My recommendation being 1, 2, so I bring my foot out to the outside of his foot, then step, or just a hard compass step, will achieve the exact same thing. Now when it comes to countering against the catch of the cut, let's go ahead and switch sides. We get an even simpler and, dare I say, more elegant solution. So for this, we're going to go ahead and have Jake just step directly up against me rather than doing the Colby one, though this will still work in that regard. So, he's down in dente, I go ahead and execute my cut, boom. Now before he can get any sort of seizure on my elbow, to prevent this, I'm going to seize his elbow. So I take my left hand off, and I grab hold of his, and I can go ahead and, right now, because of my range, I can grab that comfortably, but realistically, I'll go ahead and grab that elbow while passing, turning him, and thus able to execute my thrust to the back of his head. So, here's that again. Boom! And that stops him quite nicely. Even if he does manage to get a hold of my arm or my elbow, by advancing forward with this push, we're in equal grips. I, however, have the better chance of turning him since he had to bend his arm to receive this cut. So, pretty fun, pretty elegant. I really like it. And Fiore says very little about this counter. Just grab his elbow and he can do nothing to me. So now, let's go ahead and switch roles again, and also switch sources. So, when it comes to Paulus Hector Mair, or Mair, depending upon your pronunciation, he again gives us thrusting cut. But there's a little bit of difference in regards to how he executes things, and a lot of difference in his counters. So, for the thrust, we're going to see more German style, right? He's going to be left foot forward, and he's going to have his arms crossed on his right side. Now this could mean one of three guards. It could mean Flug, could mean Schlussel, could also mean Ox. For thrusting at the body, usually Flug or Schlussel is best. And the reason for this is that with his arms torqued like that, he can get a lot of force out without even necessarily needing to step that far. Versus with Fiore in the more central grip, he had to step in a little bit more solidly. This, because it gives you that twist, he can get a lot of power with that and not need to step all that far. So he doesn't commit himself as much as we did before. So, like I said, it's for this reason I don't believe that Paulus Hector describes us stepping backward. Instead, he prefers to step in place. So, I'm going to go ahead and put my right foot forward, and I assume a position that's basically 1-for-1, right? But as this thrust comes out, I'm going to just open to defend myself. I'm then going to throw my left leg forward, grab hold of his arm, and then plant the point into his throat. Basically the exact same play. Nothing really changed. Let's go ahead and trade sides. The only thing that altered is I'm not stepping backward, and his thrust now comes in a little bit differently. Nice and simple. And if he turns on you, do what you need to do. But again, block, grab, step. Now, against the cut, that's where things change quite significantly. So, for this, he recommends that if you're the one with the sword, you're standing left foot forward, and the sword is held just ahead of your face. So, i.e., high von top. The reason you want to be standing like this is the best way to execute just good, solid, killing people blows, right? Demonetized instantly. But, point being, I'm a guy with an insignificant weapon. He needs to just chop me down and move on to the next person. He's not worried about anything cagey. Now, the advantage that this gives me is because he's up high, I get a little bit more time to stifle his incoming shot. So I'm going to be left foot forward for this, with my dagger tucked to my arm. And it's basically going to be the same idea. If he starts his cut, I throw myself up into it to block that shot. Now, this is where things are going to differ. So, I'm going to go ahead and back up a little bit so you guys can see. Rather than reaching to the outside, like we talked about, that's not a good idea because he can fight us up there. But also, I'm not going to bother turning the elbow. Instead, I'm going to reach into this gap that I created. So underneath my own arm, I could also alternatively reach between his arms. But now back to normal, I'm going to reach between, and I'm going to grab hold of his right hand, using my dagger to keep hold of him as I do this. Now once I've got a good hold on that right hand, I'm going to turn it, so my thumb is going to go from down to up. This causes his thumb to go from up to down as I tug it forward. I'm trapping his arm underneath my arms and also bringing him off balance. This is good because now if he tried to divorce that to catch this cut, he's a lot closer. That's going to be very hard for him. Versus if he didn't and he left his foot back, you can tug someone rather significantly here. I don't have to worry about his sword at all, and I can plant that point into any of his soft bits. So, we'll show that again. Catch, reach, pull and grab, boom. There's your point. Now, again, pretty simple. Same sort of concept. We don't want to end up fighting them on equal terms, so we invert their arms or change their arms in some way that throws them off balance and negates their weapon. Now let's talk about the counters. So, for the counters, we get significantly more drama. There's a lot more kind of back and forth going on here. And the important thing to remember about these counters is I don't think it was ever intended to be a pure, you will learn this move, you will get so good at this move, you can do it in a tense situation. I think, whereas Fiore didn't bother writing specifics and just kind of went, do this, you'll be fine, this is more, here are the concepts, you can practice it by doing it exactly this way, and then when the heat is on, you'll do an approximation of. At least that's my personal take on it, as when it comes to recreating these moves, we never know 100%, right? But I think this will work. So, let's go ahead and trade sides for this. Against the thrust, we're going to basically have the same sort of concept. So, I execute my thrust, he executes his block, boom, he steps up and grabs my left hand. My priority is I need to get that left hand off of my right hand so I can go back to sword land. The problem is, he has the first tempo to attack. So the very first thing I'm going to do is, as he starts to attack me with that dagger, is just reach out to block it. Now this is not going to be a big fancy block, this is just a stifling. You get a good amount of feeling for him leaving the sword, and this is a pretty simple block for me to do. Now I'm not going to grab him. Normally when we do a dagger block like this, we grab and turn and then try to wrestle him. I don't want to fight at the body with Jake right now. So I block it, which is going to cause him to then start looking to stab me somewhere else. So as I block it, I'm going to try and open it to my left as much as possible. This means that he's more likely to take a bigger tempo to come back in with that power stab. So I'm stifling, pushing a little bit, so that way his next stab takes more time to come at me. So once I get that open and he's now focused on, need to stab man again, right? So I blocked it, he's pulling back. I'm going to, go ahead and drop your arm a little bit. No. I'm going to take my elbow, and I'm going to move the tip of it over on top of his arm as I tuck my sword tight to me. Now, Mair's quite vague about the description of this, but this is the best way I find to do it. He says to rip your sword back to you. So, I'm going to break his grip by taking my elbow point over. At the same time, I'm going to compass step with my left foot. That will cause me to break the grip. My sword is still nice and secure. I've got my left hand free. Put it back onto my pommel, and just pass backward with the mother of all overhouse. Now, it's disjointed, it looks weird right now, but let's talk about what's happening. So here's the action again. I do my thrust, he blocks that, he grabs me. First things, don't get stabbed, right? I then delay his second stab. As soon as his attention goes back to that dagger and he starts pulling back from me, that's when I clear. Because I need to get this off of me. If I can get him thinking about that and where he's going to put it next, he's not worrying about his arm anymore. By stepping this way as I clear his grip as well, I'm buying myself a lot more time against that second thrust, and all the time I need is just enough to whip that cut. This is not one you want to ever do in friendly sparring, by the way, because that backhanded cut is going to hurt him, I guarantee it. But, put together relatively fluidly, it's not that hard. We'll go through it smooth. And I'm pretty much good. By moving this way, I'm out of range. He's more likely to go ahead and just take the loss and leave at that point, which is good. Now, when it comes to countering the catch of the cut, this one, in my opinion, is very smooth and very useful. So what's going to happen is I'm up here, and I'm going to start my action. You're going to be other foot forward. There we go. I'm going to start my cut. He's going to catch it. Boom. All right, other foot forward. You're going to pass into it. There we go. Very important that you do that, and also very important, yeah, nice and tight. You do not want your wrist breaking, right? Now, as he's reaching out to grab hold of my right hand, my priority, once again, is this. But now I have a lot more time. There are two tempo that I can exploit here. Either I can exploit the tempo where he's reaching for my hand, or I can exploit the tempo when he's got my hand. Either way, he has to first turn this and control it before it's safe for him to bring this dagger into bear, because my point and my edge is still at his face. So, let's talk about the two different ways you can do it. The first way, the simplest way, and especially if you're familiar with wrestling, this should feel pretty natural. I do my cut, he catches it, and as soon as that hand is reaching out, I just go ahead and reach my own hand underneath my right arm and just sweep it to the outside. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to get his left arm stifled in his upper opening so that he can't effectively use his dagger. As soon as I've got that sweep, just keep your sword high, pass backward with a cut. Very simple. Now you might say, why don't we block the dagger again? Here is why. If I catch and he grabs hold of my arm or is doing whatever and I focus on that dagger, we're now wrestling at the body. This is equal grips. His weapon is way better at this than mine. He can definitely worm that thing in there before I can get control of my sword. If I try to go for throw, like a bend in my sword or whatever, he's still got the better weapon. Have to get that arm off of me. So, one more time on the smooth sweep, then we'll show the altar. Boom. He starts to reach. I push it out. There's my cut. Second option, he actually gets a hold of my hand. This one's where you got to be a little meaner. So I do my cut, he catches it, and he gets hold of my hand. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my left hand off, and I'm going to grab, so to show you, his index finger's right here, his pinky finger's right there. Put your thumb on the knuckle of the index, put your index finger on the knuckle of the pinky, so you're grabbing across the widest part of his hand. Grab that, squeeze it, and rip it off of yours, and just shove it up into his face. If he's opening your hand too much, then as you do this, roll over a little bit to gain yourself some time. This is going to suck for him, by the way, but it's not actually a pain thing. It's more about just crumpling his grip like a beer can. So, here's that again. Boom, he gets that grip on, break the grip, and then just leave your hand high. That one's a lot less preferable, because if he gets that tight to me, I'm running a very tight race. But, still possible. Break the grip, move to your back pocket, that's where it's going to keep you safe, and keep the sword in play. But, otherwise, thank you very much, Jake. And hopefully everyone enjoyed that. Like I said, I wanted to go over it since my classes have been covering it recently. Would I put my life in the hands of these techniques? I don't have many other great options, right? The important thing about them is the concept. And also, it's also important to remember, this is a worst case scenario. 9 times out of 10, the guy with the sword probably beat the dude with the dagger. But if you keep kind of roughly to these concepts, which might get you out of the way, who knows? Test them yourself before making your own conclusions. So far, I like them. I like Fiore's a little better, though, I will admit. Now, we're going to be covering more fun asymmetrical dagger stuff soon, probably next week, because of Shanksgiving. So happy Shanksgiving, everyone. But also expect to see some more weird mixed weapons coming down the pipe for fights through history. But otherwise, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll go over some other techniques another time.